So again, good afternoon, good evening, buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos y todas. My name is Lisa, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to this virtual space together, or if you're viewing this later on. I serve as the Justice and Peace Coordinator for the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And we're excited to have both members of the family of Joseph, whether sisters, associates, partners in mission, agrégés, as well as many others from other religious communities. So we hope that you feel most welcome here. We are hosting this session as part of the Federation's Immigration Working Group, which is a group of folks from across the country who gather pretty much monthly, and we discuss anything from how we can collectively act to staying up to date on issues. And so one of the ministries that we try to offer somewhat regularly are these updates of what's really going on, cutting through that noise. We recognize that we'll begin in prayer and silence to have some time to ground us. We'll also have some time for introduction of our speakers, and we have a really marvelous lineup of folks today. We'll do a context setting and then a deeper sharing and conversation. Our hope is that you come away with some key learnings about emerging realities that are at the border as well as throughout this country. We hope that you learn a little bit more about the realities of asylum seekers and the pursuit of work authorization, which can be a really long journey. And we also hope that you feel stirred to act with collective prayer, with financial support of really phenomenal organizations, and through legislative advocacy. As people of faith, we are called to keep vigil. We're called to unite our hearts, our prayers, our hands, and our feet with all dear neighbors, particularly with migrants and people on the move. Several folks from the Immigration Working Group will lead our prayer times, including Sister Colleen Dauerbach, Sister Deirdre Griffin, and Kasha Sainer, who are all members of the Immigration Working Group. And on the screen here, you'll see the organizations that we're delighted to partner with tonight. Hope Border Institute, and you'll hear from each of these a little bit more, so don't worry. Hope Border Institute, Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, and the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. So at this point, I invite Sister Colleen Dauerbach to lead us in an opening prayer. And again, throughout this time, feel free to have your camera on or off.
Good evening, and let us pray. At these times, Joseph, like so many, was a refugee without home, welcome, or work. So what he could do, he did. It made all the difference. Let us just pause for a moment. And what word or phrase speaks to you? And may you carry that throughout this gathering, as Joseph is our model.
Thanks, Sister Colleen, for that moment of pause to ground. The statue you see here is of Joseph, and it's found in our Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange community, I believe in the garden area. And this text, this prayer, this art comes from one of our own sisters as well, Sister Badaliba, also from the community of Orange. So we give gratitude for those great artists who call us into this deeper contemplation. I now invite Maria Elena Perez, who's the Justice Director for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, to offer some introductions and see who we're going to be meeting today.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. I have the privilege of introducing our speakers tonight. First, we have Sister Ann Carabino, Sister of Social Service. She's a border pilgrim. Sister Ann, it's from the Anima International Foundation. Her work centers around collaborating with many others locally, statewide, and of course, across the nation. She recently returned from the border pilgrimage in Mexicali and San Diego, and she will share her experience with us tonight. We also have Leidy Perez. She is the Policy and Communications Director for the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project. Originally from a small town near Maracaibo, Venezuela, Leidy immigrated to the U.S. when she was 6 years old and grew up in Miami. Leidy is an experienced communications specialist and former direct services attorney. Prior to joining ASAP, Leidy worked at the White House Domestic Policy Council as a special assistant to the President for Immigration. Very interesting, Leidy. She also worked for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, focusing on communications and policy work. So now we have Jesus de la Torre, a research fellow and Hope Border Institute. Originally from Spain, Jesus has a master's in migration studies at the University of San Francisco under a Fulbright scholarship. He holds a bachelor's in international relations. He studied in Spain and Brazil, and a master's in European Union. He has been honored to accompany migrant justice advocacy movements in Spain, the U.S., Central America. And last but not least, we have Marilyn Zigmund Luke. She's the director for advocacy for the Alliance to End Human Trafficking, which she leads and coordinates the organization's public policy and legislative advocacy activities and campaigns. As the director for advocacy, she serves as a visionary and adaptive leader who models the Alliance mission, vision, and values. Marilyn has worked with men at many levels of government, federal, state, and local, with over 25 years of professional experience with both public and private sector organizations. Welcome to our speakers tonight.
Yay, it's such a delight to have you. We're actually going to dive right in. I'm not seeing Sister Ann here at the moment, so we might ping her and make sure that she is well. But I just to hear from you, Jesus, Leidy, and Marilyn, a little bit more about your organizations for a few minutes, just hearing who are you, what are you about, and how do you come to this issue and the realities of migration. So Leidy, if you wouldn't mind starting, we'd love to hear a little bit more about ASAP.
I would be happy to. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Again, Leidy Perez, I'm the Policy and Communications Director at the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project. We are the largest membership organization of asylum seekers, with now over 600,000 asylum seekers from over 175 countries that live in all 50 states in the United States. And we are an organization that focuses on providing asylum seekers, our members, with resources for those who may not have access to attorneys. We also have a policy team that I head that is focused on really like 5 main policy priorities that come directly from our membership. So when our members sign up to become ASAP members, they are asked what is something that they would change about the asylum system, about the immigration system. And we have derived our policy priorities directly from ideas and things that our members find important. And that's pretty much the North Star for our work. And what we have focused on most recently is work permits. Both our litigation department and our policy and communications department have been kind of 2 sides of the same coin to ensure that asylum seekers, ASAP members, receive work permits faster and are able to have work permits for longer. And I'm sure we'll get in later on in the discussion into a little bit more of the details of what that is. But access to work permits is the issue of top priority to our members. As we'll talk about, it is what gives them the ability to feed themselves, their families. It's what gives them the ability to remain in the United States, remain safe, remain housed. So it's something that is very important to kind of all aspects of our work.
Jesus or Marilyn, would you like to share a little bit more about your organization?
Sure.
Definitely, I don't know, Marilyn. You want to go ahead? Yeah, go ahead, Marilyn.
Okay, I can go next. Thank you, Jesus. We are formally the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. So many of you may remember us by that name. We rebranded the organization's name in late 2023. And so now we're the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. Essentially, we are a collaborative, faith-based organization, and we do a number of different things. We provide education, we provide support services in terms of access and referral for those who might need services in terms of human trafficking. And we also do a bit of advocacy, which is primarily my job, in terms of working with a group of advocates that we have across the nation. Our membership is based primarily of 115 congregations. And essentially, we have a number of Catholic sisters, but we also have volunteers and other organizations who share the goal of ending human trafficking. And so that's a little bit of an overview in terms of our organization and what we do and what we try and do every day.
I think I can conclude. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm calling from El Paso, Ciudad Juárez region, from the border. Here at the Hope Border Institute, Hope, or the Hope Border Institute, in our longer term. It's a binational organization. It's a grassroots Catholic organization that seeks to build solidarity across borders. And we do that from Central America to the border to the interior of the United States. In Central America, mostly we work on addressing the root causes of forced migration, on ensuring that people have the right to stay, the right to thrive in place, and to find a dignified life wherever they want to find it. But also we work a lot on the right to migrate and the right to access safety and protection. And that includes the protection during the journey and also protection at the U.S. Mexico border. In Ciudad Juárez, we accompany people on the move by providing healthcare, psychosocial support, and together with the Diocese of El Paso, running a fund that supports asylum seekers in shelters and other facilities and even in the streets. We run a clinic together with volunteer doctors across the border. And in that clinic, we also provide second support, healthcare, and also we refer people to other kind of services like legal services. And then in the US, we focus a lot on establishing a system of continuous care and protection for asylum seekers and also long-term migrants in our country, and changing migration policies so they are fair and just and humane, and they place people's dignity at their core. So I'm in charge also of working on the root causes, a little bit supporting the policy and advocacy team. And we've been working very closely with the Sister of St. Joseph and the affiliates of St. Joseph. So for me, it's an honor to be here with you all today, and I cannot wait to learn with you all. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm actually going to bring in Sister Suzanne Jabro, who is going to fill in for someone who was going to share a little bit more about a recent border pilgrimage. Unfortunately, Sister Anne is experiencing a power outage, which can happen in these days. She seems like she's fine, but we just hope that power returns soon. So if Sister Suzanne is here, I believe, there you are. Hello. We'll just make sure you're unmuted really quick. 1 second. 1 second. Here we go. Waiting. Oh, there you go. Would you share a little bit more about this recent pilgrimage, this pilot program with us a little bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to. In California, we decided that we would have a pilgrimage leaving from San Diego to Mexicali, to the whole southern border of California. And the Sisters of Mercy and Keith from the Franciscan School of Theology, and Lisa, RSCJ, and myself, Rondelette, we helped plan the outline of the event. And there were 23 of us in all for women, religious, and men. And we started out in San Diego, and we stopped at Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's Scott Santa Rosa's parish, the Jesuit parish, because they have a hostel that they built for so many of the single men, many from Venezuela, who are in San Diego. And they could stay there for 1 month for overnight and for meals, and they, out in the morning, back in the evening kind of thing. It was torrential rains here, so it was quite an event of what it would be like to be a migrant arriving in a city with no home in the rain. So we were right with them that evening. The next day, Sister Mary Waskowiak had planned a trip to Tijuana for us, and the Providence hospitals provided 2 vans, and we crossed over into Tijuana. And we went to Casa de los Pobres, which for me was a stark reality of how global migration is at this time. I didn't see anyone from Mexico. They were from Afghanistan, Cuba, Colombia, Russia, just to name a few. And then we went to the Scalabrini Sisters Women's Facility, which was sort of I call it a 5-star shelter. Anyway, it was lovely. They're wonderful, and they were closing their house, one of their houses, so they could build a center at the Darien crossing right there by Panama. So that is their plan. Costa Rica is closing, and they're opening that facility. So that was amazing. We left the next morning after we returned from Tijuana. We went on the 8 freeway, as you know, goes from San Diego all the way to Arizona. So we crossed that highway and intended to stop in a place where migrants are coming around the fence in the middle of the state somewhere, and they were landing in the desert and just sitting down. One day there were 1,600. Most of the time there were 600. And then the Border Patrol will come. They want to meet with them. They're coming to say, we're asking for asylum. And then they pick them up and take them. But in the meanwhile, a lot of the churches are helping. On that day, it had snowed badly, and we were coming along the roads, barely could see ourselves, but all that was left were the tents that had been abandoned by them, so because no one was crossing on that particular day. We went on then to Calexico. We did a pilgrimage, took us to the cemetery, the Terrace Park Cemetery, which looks a lot like other cemeteries when you enter, but at the far end there is a fence. And if you walk to the back to the fence where you really can't see through, you can only see between, there is buried, unknown, no names, just a stone and a number, all those who were found in the desert or drowned. And that it's as far as the eye can see. Even in death, there is a fence. That day, the next day, we went into Mexicali to the shelter where we normally go, and we had quite a fiesta, although we began with legal presentation by Sister Lisa and Lopez, who runs an immigration center in San Diego, and then Hilda Cruz, she presided at our ritual. We always do rituals at the migrant shelters, and that consists of a blessing of every single person with oil. And it becomes a very sacred time for them. And then we had a special lunch, and then we had, of course, piñatas. We had to have our piñatas. And there were a lot of sisters from, several sisters came from Mexico. And several of them were very good in leading piñatas and things like the piñata dance, etc. Anyway, we left that night and we went back to our hotel in San Diego, had dinner, and the next day we had a theological reflection on our experience, which was extremely profound. So we're already talking about the next pilgrimage. The Franciscan School of Theology have already asked if we could join together for the university students. So we all said enthusiastically yes. So thank you for asking me.
Yeah, Sister Suzanne, I had a couple questions for you. So some folks on this call may not know the shelter that you're referring to. I'm especially thinking we have folks from different religious communities on this call.
That's right.
So could you just give a quick highlight of Border Compassion?
Yes, Border Compassion is under the ministerial services of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet. I am the founder, I guess you'd call it. I call myself the chief guide and an inviter, I guess. And I invite people to cross over and accompany them. All right, we go to a shelter called the Cobina Posada in Mexicali, and also its partner shelter, the Refugio. And both of them are under the same umbrella. This time and last week, we also visited 3 other shelters that are in our neighborhood. So to build the collaborative within the migrant community, which is really important. And these shelters are not owned by the directors. No one is paid to work in these shelters, although there's this shelter, the Posada especially, has today probably 50 families waiting to legally cross the border. They have their apps and they're waiting for the invite. The time in the border would be somewhere between 2 months and 5. And they're going much faster now. At one time, it became a refugee camp. There were over 300 people in this space, and it was really something. But there is no school. Border Compassion, through volunteers, pays to hire a stipend, a teacher every day to teach English 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. And they do have health care. We do bring groups down, like parishes like St. Ignatius in San Francisco. It was a whole team of lawyers and their assistants. And they give presentations, but then they see every family one-to-one and private. Because the stories, as I shared this morning with Maria Helena's group, you know, one woman there, she's just so beautiful, and she came from Mexico City, and she has a 4-month-old baby that's just a doll, and a 7-year-old. She said, I had a small little business, and they were telling me I had to up my tax, and the tax was going to go up, the tax was going to go up. She said, I can't afford the tax anymore, and I said, give us your baby, we'll sell it. And that night she left. That's the kind of stories and trauma and that they carry. So we do a lot of, like we bring the Que Pase Tar group that deals with traumas all over the world for healing touch and different things like that. So okay.
Yeah, that's great.
What is Border Compassion?
Yeah.
It's 2 years old. It's just very, very new. And we crossed over 386 people last year.
Wow.
So we're on the track to do that again this year. So.
And you, the other thread that's really interesting to me when you talked about this pilgrimage is that it was all different sorts of religious communities.
Yes, it was.
All coming together. Now, is that new? Do you feel like that's something that we need to keep doing? Like, what was that experience?
Well, we had never done a pilgrimage before. Always we've had different religious communities from California primarily, but we have had people fly in from Ohio and back east and, you know, different locations. And so this was really quite new for us to do. And we were even learning as we were going, because we haven't been to some of these places ourselves, you know, vice versa. So, and we hadn't connected with the sisters in Mexico in this way. But, you know, it was a very, lots of people were interested in it. But, you know, a week long you know, 3 days and 2 days of travel, that's a long time. And a lot of people couldn't get out of their jobs that long. So I
Well,
think we'll do it again.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. We shared a link to all the organizations that we're going to feature tonight in the chat and in the follow-up email. And I actually want to bring in, Sister Suzanne mentioned something about an app. And so I'm going to go ahead and transition us to a little bit more about the asylum process with Jesus and Leidy. So thank you, Sister Suzanne, so much for pinch hitting, as they say. I'm going to make sure we'll get our Jesus and Leidy on spotlight so we can see their wonderful faces. Okay, I see one of you. Okay, there we are. Great. Okay, so Suzanne kind of gave us a recent lay of the land, kind of firsthand experience of what they were witnessing on their pilgrimage. Could you fill out that context for us a little bit more? Jesus, I'm especially thinking about Hope Border Institute as a border organization, of kind of what are you seeing the realities of both access to asylum or not access to asylum for folks who may not be super familiar?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Lisa. And I think all of you are very knowledgeable about the process of asylum, but let me tell you a little bit about the reality that we are experiencing right now in the Juarez El Paso region, which might be different from the realities of other cities at the border. And I think in Tijuana it's very different, right? Sister Suzanne, like you were talking about all the nationalities that you were encountering here in Ciudad Juarez, El Paso. We mostly have people from Mexico, Venezuela, Guatemala, Ecuador, Peru. We don't have Afghanis so much, or people from other African countries. So having said that, you know that after the end of Title 42, the Biden administration implemented this circumvention of legal pathways rule, right? And now the app, the CBP1 app, is the only way to schedule an appointment to present at a port of entry and then say that you need to claim asylum or you would like to claim asylum, right? But for many people who are waiting to get that appointment, they can be waiting for months. We have had people waiting for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, even 8 months. Like people who have been waiting forever. And people really want to follow the process, even if the process is unfair. And that's a very clear message that we always say. However, many people, they fall desperate. Their mental health worsens because they've been waiting for the app for so long that they can no longer stand it. They've been paying for cell data, which is very expensive, for many, many weeks. So they run out of money. They cannot work because they are in transition. And many of them, they fear that being in Ciudad Juarez or waiting there is making them more vulnerable. And now what we see right now in Ciudad Juarez in particular is an increase in kidnappings and abuse and extortion. Because many people who are in shelters or who are going to shelters or who are left in the streets, they are very identifiable. And many of them have been kidnapped not only once, but twice. So imagine the process of going through your migration journey, needing to wait for the app, and then having suffered so much while you are waiting, right? So it's in that situation where we've seen that people, they want to go to the port of entry, to the international reach and say, please process my request to be an asylum seeker in the US, to claim my right to claim asylum in the US. And even though that's legal and that's considered within this new law, many people are turned away. So many people are not even allowed to access the port of entry. Mexican officials turn them away, or many people are turned away once they get to the US officials. There was a report that was published 2 days ago that said that from all the people who show up at the port of entry trying to be processed, only 5 of them per day are allowing. 5 of them. And in Ciudad Juarez, we have 200 daily appointments. So you can imagine the level of the situation we are talking about. So it's in that context where many people lose faith and they decide to cross the river. And now with Governor Abbott razor wire, many of them need to cross through the razor wire. Families with children who are completely desperate. And that is causing severe injuries that we are seeing in our clinica, but also in the Paso hospitals. And then for other people, they want to cross through the desert because that's the only route that they have available. Sometimes they need to jump the border wall with very severe consequences. And once they go through the desert, in particularly during the summertime, which is extremely hot in the area, many of them are dying. And that's the case for women in particular, because our route is thought to be shorter, and many women try luck, and many of them are dying in the desert. And I myself, together with a group of the Battalion Search and Rescue, I'm going to the desert, and we are encountering one person will be too much, but we're encountering too many people. So that's the reality right now. The access to asylum is very limited, despite what people tend to say about open borders. The border it's extremely dangerous right now for many people, and many people out of desperation, and after having suffered so much, they are seeking safety in the best way they can.
Yeah, and thanks for kind of clarifying that there's just a desire, like it's just a heartfelt desire to survive and to live, right? It's such a basic right. And I'm struck especially too about folks and organizations on the border who've long been so responsive and receptive to migrants, to people on the move. And I'm thinking a lot about right now, we know of the recent legal stuff happening with Annunciation House, which is we strongly support them throughout the CSJ family. And so it just seems like such a disjointed reality of people desiring that access to asylum, not being able to do it, and really risking their lives in a really profound way. It also seems very like inherently Catholic that people have dignity and workers have dignity. That's a very like our roots in Catholic social teaching. And so, Leidy, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more just about what you hear from your constituents. I love that you're a membership-based organization. You're paying attention to the realities of your own folks, and they're guiding your decision-making, which is so cool. So I don't know if you just wanted to share a little bit more about, is there a typical asylum process? What's that like? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to, and I think that for the sake of trying to keep it as less legalese as possible, I'll say that there are kind of like two asylum processes. One is the one that Jesus kind of alluded to and spoke a little bit about, that folks are coming through the border through CBP-1 to seek asylum in that way. And then there is kind of a secondary way in which people can seek asylum. That is, you enter the U.S. with a visa, student, or some other visitor, some other type of visa. And then once you are in the United States, you can seek asylum because you fear returning to your home country. There are problems kind of at every level, and in both of these like ways of seeking asylum for people. Jesus did a great job at kind of telling us about all of the like the problems people face before they even are able to access the protection, and that is of a right to them that is established in U.S. and international law. And that is very similar to some of the problems that people will have later on when they're in the United States. If say, for instance, you enter using a visitor visa and something happens in your home country, and you are afraid of returning, someone hurts your family, whatever the case may be, you decide to stay in the United States and seek asylum, those cases can take upwards of 10 years for them to go through the process of just kind of, it's called the affirmative asylum process versus the defensive asylum process, which are the people that are coming through the border or that are in active deportation proceedings. And you know, it's people living in limbo for a decade, in pretty much in either one of those scenarios. And in so many of these instances, people have to always kind of, it's a hurry up and wait, right? They get to say you get through all of the hurdles of applying through the CBP-1 app, for example. You then are somehow make it through this process. You're one of those very few people that can apply. You are bussed in likely from Texas into another city that you probably don't know anybody in. You have no community. There is no established relationships that you have. And Then you have to wait to apply for asylum, and you have a year to apply for asylum. The vast majority of our members and asylum seekers across the board do not have access to legal services. So you have to figure out how to apply to the I-589 is the form for asylum. So you have to figure out how to fill out this form, how to submit evidence, how to send it in properly. If you're in immigration court, sometimes your immigration court is in, say, El Paso, but you've now been bused to Colorado. You've now been bused to New York. You have to figure out how to do, it's called a change of venue, right? So you have to petition the court to move your case from one state to the other. All of these hurdles keep people kind of in limbo and keep people in sort of a desperation state. We'll talk a little bit about it later on, I'm sure. But in all of this, people have to wait 6 months after having applied for asylum to be eligible to receive a work permit, right? So if we're putting together what Jesus just told us and this kind of figure, that means that potentially you as an asylum seeker have waited upwards of 8 months in Juarez. You then were able to get in through the CBP app. You then say it takes 3-4 months at the very low end of what it takes people to like actually apply for asylum. And then it takes another 6 months for you to be eligible to obtain a work permit. You're in a city you don't know, you're in a country that you usually don't know the language to. And so all of these barriers keep people in sort of this like desperation, sort of fight or flight. And in many instances, it is, as Jesus noted, it's women, it's children, it's families that are kind of like left in shelters, because I'm sure everyone here has heard that, you know, that the media has been drumming a lot of kind of that the news cycle of asylum seekers in shelters. Well, if you're taking all like the figures that we've just laid out, we're looking at 1.5 to 2 years of people not being able to work. Where else would they go if they don't have family or a support system in the United States? Of course, they're going to go into shelters. If there is no congressional solution, if there is no administration solution for people to have faster access to work permits and work permits that are valid for longer.
I appreciate you laying that out in not so much legalese. That's helpful for our community here, who are maybe not legal experts. You said something a little bit about this sense of desperation, mentally and emotionally and spiritually. We can imagine that, but also economically. Like, it is a desperate reality that folks are living across the country. We know that even if someone has access to work, and they were having a work permit, you know, wages might be low, but just kind of backing up a little bit, how are folks surviving? How are the folks in your community surviving economically? Like, if they don't want to or are not in a shelter, and I assume many of them are working and in a shelter would be my guess, what are folks doing to survive economically in this in-between period? That's upwards of 6 months, a year and a half.
The short answer to that is really unfortunate, but people are basically forced to enter the labor force without work authorization, which makes them much more susceptible to abusive labor environments. It makes them much more susceptible to just being in a situation where they are paid less than people with work authorization. And I know that there are more labor experts here that can go into this, and I can defer to them. But really what you are seeing and we're hearing from our members is that not having access to work authorization is making people, because people have to work, that's the reality of it. And so when you don't have access to be able to work in kind of like the legal way, people are doing, we've heard of people, for instance, who there was this kind of what I will call an underground sort of way of operating Uber Eats and those sort of food deliveries where a person with work authorization or who was here lawfully has an account, and they are renting their account to other people who may not have work authorization. And so whatever money that the person who delivers the food or who's doing the work makes, they have to give a percentage to the owner of the account, right? And so people have to work, people have to feed their families, people, I'm sure you all have seen that many of the shelters that were housing people across the nation are now starting to basically have kind of months where they are kicking people out of those shelters. And so the reality is, if people cannot access legal work, they're forced into the labor force without work authorization and to work under the table, proverbially.
Yeah, and I just think of that particular vulnerability of workers. Again, they have a dignity and right to work. And as people of faith, we're really called to recognize that. And so how do we respond in those ways? Jesus, I'm wondering if you have anything else to offer about how are migrants surviving in this in-between space? And I know that we've had questions that have been submitted prior to this, and we'll make sure we get to those soon. I just wanted to make sure folks know that. So go ahead, Jesus.
Yeah, definitely. Leidy explained it perfectly, like excellent. And let me bring you the case and the story of a family that we accompanied here at the end of Title 42 precisely. It was in May 2023, right? And as Leidy was explaining, they were from Venezuela and they entered before July 31st. As you all know, the Biden administration granted temporary protected status to Venezuelans who had arrived at or before July 31st of last year. Right? So they were the lucky ones, lucky, if you can call it lucky. Temporary protected status allow you to stay in the country for the time being of that protection. So they cannot deport you, and then it grants you access to a work permit, right? So supposedly that was going to help a lot, and that was going to help many people. In practice, what we have seen is what Leidy was pointing out, the lack of access to counseling and legal aid is proven like the major difficulty for most people. And this family that we accompanied from Venezuela, they went to Denver because they didn't have anyone, and they had their court appointment in Denver, and they had to go to the asylum court. So they went there, right? They didn't have work permits, and they wanted to apply for asylum, and now they qualify for TPS. It's February 2024, and they haven't still processed their TPS because they didn't have access to any kind of legal aid, and they just found a pro bono attorney. But still, they are really struggling to support their 3 kids, and they are having to work in the informal sector. He's working in construction, she's trying to work at a kitchen or cleaning, and that is what is making them very susceptible, also falling into networks of trafficking for labor exploitation purposes, right? And other kind of forms of trafficking. And so that is a dire situation that many people are living, struggling to pay rent, to secure housing, to secure a job, to provide for their kids. And it's very dramatic because for them it's even more painful because they really want to work. Everyone wants to work. Everyone has dreams and aspirations, and they really, really, really want to pursue them. So the fact that the policies are not allowing them to do so is what is creating this perception of chaos. It's not a crisis of the people, it's a crisis of the policies.
It's not a crisis of the people, it's a crisis of the policy. That is some truth. Thanks for sharing that. And in that similar vein, you touched a little bit on like folks who might be trafficked or exploited and they're vulnerable in these positions. Leidy, I didn't know if you had anything to offer about like how your work with asylum seekers interfaces with kind of this question of exploitation or trafficking. There's been a long commitment among women religious to fight against human trafficking. And so this could kind of bring this into focus a little bit more for us.
Yeah, my current work at ASAP has not put me in contact directly with those people, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. My work at the White House, however, I had the labor, like the immigration labor portfolio. And I cannot stress enough how much just access to a work permit within the United States is one of the most important ways to combat forcing people into like exploitative situations, and allowing people the flexibility of leaving work environments that are abusive and that are exploiting their labor. So I think that there's kind of a lot of different things that occur within the labor immigration kind of realm, i.e. at the center of labor and immigration, there are a lot of issues here, but I think access to work permits, as Jesus was noting, for TPS for Venezuela, for example, it's taking the government, USCIS, the agency that does this, upwards of 14 months to adjudicate these applications. It's taking USCIS upwards of 16 months to adjudicate work permit renewal applications. And so what are people to do in the interim of while they are waiting for their asylum claim? Oftentimes the places of employment that have unions, that have more protected work environments, are those same places are going to require people to have work authorization. And so when I was at the White House, really the other places, the farms, for example, the other places that may allow people to work without people having to prove that they have work authorization, there's no one supervising that. And that really tends to create an environment, not only in which people are being exploited like at their place of work, but it also doesn't allow them to leave those places of work when they are in those situations, because it limits kind of their movement because they have to work.
So in this reality of a crisis of policy and backlogs, like we've heard about backlogs before, we've heard about, just the relative inhumanity of the immigration court system, like the adjudication process. Is there one or two things you would love to see changed? I mean, I think we would like to see a lot of things overhauled. But is there any one or two things you really would love to see changed in those systems, like right now? That would make a big difference. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the ones that is most nascent is one that we have been working pretty hard at. And basically it's work permits have what's called an automatic extension period while people are waiting in this kind of backlog of 16 months. So in May of 2022, the administration extended that automatic extension to 540 days so that it would give people more time of being legally authorized to work while they were in this backlog. That rule, that temporary rule, expired last October, and to date, the administration has not renewed that rule, which means that starting in April, all of those people who have applied since October that only got a 6-month automatic extension will start to lose their work authorization. So that's kind of something that's very top of mind for our members that we've started to hear about a lot. Lisa, I will share some additional information for you on that in case folks are interested in doing additional advocacy work on that. But it's something that is so very squarely within the executive's branch ability to help people at this time. It was a temporary rule. It was not challenged legally the last time that they did it. It really is a stroke of a pen, for lack of a better word. There's kind of like the actions that the administration can do to ensure that people have access to that. I think the other piece on the CBP one is that there was a lot of issues with once people got in through CBP, they were eligible for a work permit based on being a parolee. That is, they didn't have to wait 6 months in order to apply for a work permit. However, no one had the $540 to apply for this C-11 work permit. And so unless the administration can waive that application fee so that people can apply, so that people can have access to what they are entitled to, there really isn't going to be, and people were surprised that no one was applying for these work permits, but people either did not have the money, the $540 for each work permit application, or it was very difficult for people to understand how to do a fee waiver. For a long time, we heard that there were shelters in New York that weren't providing people proof that they were living in the shelter. So if I am a migrant, I am living in a shelter, and I need proof that I haven't filed taxes in the United States because I haven't worked, but I need proof that I don't have the ability to pay $540. The only thing I can provide is a letter from the shelter saying I'm currently living in the shelter. But the shelters in New York City for a while were not providing these letters. And so, as you can see, it's a catch-22 for people that leaves people vulnerable in kind of every situation. So that's like very squarely things that the administration can do. This other piece on like what Congress can do, we can talk a little bit more about later. I know that someone else may talk about this, but the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act is a bill that was introduced by Representative Pingree. It's a bipartisan bill. It's been sponsored by a Republican member of Congress from Florida, and it would limit that 180-day waiting period, that 6-month waiting period, to only 30 days so that people can become eligible for work authorization much faster. And so Refugees International, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and ASAP have been leading a work permit coalition. And part of our coalition is the Let Asylum Seekers Work campaign, which is something that we'll talk a lot about in a little bit. But we need more people, especially your voices, to contact members of Congress, because oftentimes what happens is when they see the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization, or sorry, the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, no one answers our emails. But if they see the sisterhood, if they see the sisters are emailing, if they see other organizations, they tend to be much more responsive to you all than they are to us. So your support in that kind of area would also be really, really helpful and beneficial.
Yeah, and I just dropped that link in the chat, letasylumseekerswork.org. And I know that this more publicly launched pretty recently, if I'm correct on that. And we will hear about that bill in a little bit, but thanks for providing that context, and that is something that is on the table and has been introduced and is bipartisan, which is very rare these days. I'm wondering kind of your advice. We've gotten a couple of questions submitted ahead of time that I wanted to see if we could go through a little bit. One I kind of want to have answered first, and then we can kind of go on to the rest of them. One is, and this would be for you, Jesus, given your kind of positionality in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, just kind of addressing a little bit the Attorney General's Paxton's efforts to shut down Annunciation House, and also the potential implications that could have for other Catholic ministries and folks who are very hospitable to migrants historically. So I'm just wondering, I know that you do not work for Annunciation House, but you work in close tandem with them. If you just wanted to speak to that, it's, I think, front of mind for a lot of folks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for that question. I really wanted to address that. And it's very, very important talking about solutions and what else we can do, right? What we are seeing right now in our community in Texas, in El Paso, with the attack against Annunciation House, is an attack against service providers. It's an attack against, in particular, Catholic ministries. And it's an attack against our freedom to put our beliefs of welcoming the stranger into practice. It's an attack to all of that. And Annunciation House has been the perfect target for Attorney General Paxton, because they are a key service provider in the community. They run a shelter, a network of shelters who have been crucial for El Paso for almost 40 years. They collaborate with Border Patrol to make sure that no one is left in the streets, and they have inspired many other people in the community and in the country to follow the example, right? To welcome the stranger, which is what many of you are doing in your own cities. You are doing the hard work of opening the parishes and opening your communities to newcomers, to long-term undocumented people, and walking alongside them in their struggles and joys and difficulties, and asking for better solutions, right? And saying that we can do better and we must do better. So the attack against Annunciation House right now is based on a spurious claim that the organization is fostering smuggling, basically for the fact of providing shelter and a hot meal to people in need. So that for the Attorney General is fostering crossings from the other side of the border, instead of looking at what people are fleeing from and looking at the conditions in transit and looking at all the challenges that we have talked about. That is exactly what they are trying to do, because they are trying to create pictures of chaos, because they are intentionally trying to shut down Annunciation House. That's what this case is looking at. They want to shut down Annunciation House, and they are using the Texas Business Code to argue that they didn't provide documents on time, when administration has always said that they were going to provide them on time and ensuring that they were respecting federal protections. So the long story short is that this is a warning for everyone providing assistance to migrants or to people in need. And this is another step further in the criminalization of migrants, people of color, and service providers, including Catholic service providers in our country. So what can we do next, right? That's the question that many people are asking. Where can we find hope? Well, first of all, we need to keep or continue doing the work of welcoming. That's crucial, right? And we need to demand that we can do better. And we at Hope, we have advanced a proposal that I'm dropping here about how we can push also the federal government to advance towards a national coordination system. Part of what Governor Abbott is doing with Operation Lone Star, passing people without notice to freezing coal in many cities, not letting people get to their destinations freely and just sending them to other different places. That can be all solved if the administration challenge the Operation Lone Star and then help the communities like you all providing the services in coordinating the transportation and also coordinating the systems or the welcoming. And we have had some funding from FEMA that has been crucial to support many shelters in many different cities, but we need more, and we also need better coordination. It's not only a matter of funding, but it's a matter of better coordination. And then the second thing is restoring asylum at the border. All these attacks are due to the lack of access to asylum at the border. So if people were allowed to access asylum as the U.S. law says, between ports of entry and ports of entry, and then being processed fairly and humanely, and then being released fairly and humanely, then none of this will happen, right? And the matter will be out of hands. But for that, we need real political will, and we need to rebuild a broken immigration system that both sides have been relinquishing any responsibility, and support laws like the laws that Leidy was mentioning before, that to let asylum seekers work and make common sense changes to the system.
Thanks for that. Do you have any advice on how we can care for people who maybe will not qualify for asylum in this era? Kind of folks who wouldn't be eligible or kind of have slipped through the cracks? Neither of you, welcome for free. Yeah.
I think that there are other immigration benefits that folks may qualify for, right? So Jesus mentioned temporary protected status. There are other things that people may qualify for that may not necessarily be asylum, and there are kind of common sense solutions on those as well for addressing that backlog. I mean, just across the board, I when I was practicing U visa, for instance, for people that have been a victim of violence. There are so few U visas that are allotted each year for the number of people that apply for them, that it was taking upwards of 12 years for people to be able to get a U visa and then later be able to get a green card. So asylum is a microcosm to a very broken system across the board. Maybe not a microcosm, it is one pillar, I should say, of a very broken system across the board. And I do think it's critical and crucial for all of us to not only work to address the issues within the asylum system, but all of the other issues in a very broken system that would protect potentially other people that may not qualify for asylum.
And do either of you want to weigh in a little bit on this question of political will and the real disappointment and harm I think administrations, both the current one and previous administrations, have done around immigration? Do you see any traction? Do you see anything that could happen either administratively in terms of like the executive branch and or Congress? I think that's a real question I have as someone who's called to help us advocate legislatively. What are you seeing?
I think Leidy has more background in the administration, so she can guide us like in what we can do, right? And very briefly, I'll say we need to create a moment of opportunity. I think many people are losing hope that a comprehensive package for justice for migrants is possible. And I really believe that it's our challenge and our task as faith leaders, all of you are faith leaders, to create that moment of opportunity, to keep calling your representatives, to mobilize your communities, and to keep saying that it's possible and that we want fairness and justice for our migrant neighbors. No matter if they arrived yesterday or they've been here for 20 years, all of them deserve justice, like many people in this country, right? And I think it's a moment to organize, to co-create, to think bigger and try to mobilize our own people in our communities, which you are already doing, and coordinate our efforts and letting others know about it and create excitement. And in that line, we'll be joining the Bishop of El Paso at the end of the month in March 21st in a vigil and march for human dignity for all migrants in our country, remembering the people who have died at the border, including in the fire in Ciudad Juarez, and that probably you remember 1 year ago, for all the people who are doing the work of welcoming, including Annunciation House, and against laws that we know they don't work, and in favor of solutions that do work, which is basically granting people's dignity, ensuring the access to asylum, providing more legal pathways, providing a pathways for legalization for the people who have been working and contributing to this country for so long, and then creating better opportunities for everyone in the end.
And I can answer your question with maybe an anecdote from my time in the government. In the first 3 months that I had started at the White House, I had a portfolio that I was kind of taking care of as part of my duties. And it was like a random Tuesday. I came in and my boss was like, we need to put everything away that we were thinking about doing because my apology, was a Monday. So we need to put everything away that we were thinking about doing because the president went to mass yesterday and he was asked about this particular issue. And so we literally, by the priest. And so we literally dropped everything that we were doing because the president had been asked by a religious leader a question that he wanted to kind of get the answer to. And so that little anecdote to tell you all that you all are very powerful. Religious leaders are very powerful within the administration, within the White House and within Congress. When you all weigh in on issues, people listen. And even if it is considered, when I was first working on work permits several years ago, no one thought about work permits as the thing that people cared about. And so the more asylum seekers said work permits are really important to us, the more it kind of came to the national stage, the more it became an issue where different types of stakeholders, including religious leaders, started to weigh in on. And all of a sudden we have had kind of very monumental changes in the work permit space. So people, for example, are now going to be getting 5-year work permits instead of 2-year work permits, which was something that we had been advocating for a long time. And so all of that to say is that when this community weighs in, on behalf of migrants, people at the proverbial policy tables where decisions are made, pay attention. And so I would implore you all to use all avenues of advocacy that you have for some of these issues, the ones that Jesus mentioned, and also the issues of people that are kind of in the United States currently without access to work authorization, without access to kind of all of the other things that we've spoken about.
There's a lot of collective power in this virtual space. I'm always reminded that in the Federation itself, we have a little under 3,000 sisters, so 3,000 vowed women religious alone. And I just think, what if each of those women reached out to 2 or 3 people they know, whether their niece or their great nephew or their cousin, and said, hey, have you heard about what's going on? Let me tell you a little bit about what I've been hearing about what's going on at the border, and dispel some of the noise and these stories of chaos, and to really say there's a path forward. There is an opportunity, and that does matter. So I think sometimes we sell ourselves short, that a call or an email or even educating our peers doesn't have an impact, because it does. And it can get to those highest levels of government and policy making. So I really appreciate that.
And
I also,
Lisa, can I
yeah,
make
yeah, please.
a quick comment about that? I know, I think she's not here in this call. I know she doesn't like to be on the spot, but I want to praise publicly Sister Sharon White. She's in Philly. She's a rock star. Let me tell you, for me, she's my inspiration, and I mean it. Whenever we need her, she's welcome people from the border in her community. She's learning Spanish to talk to these people. She sent the letters to Congress. She sent the letters to many of you. And whenever there's an action, she's always there, like many of you all. And I mean it. You are setting the example for us all. So you are already change makers. And I want to say, because it's very powerful for us here at the border and then in the interior, to see your example, because that's exactly what we want to do. We want to be like you all.
It takes all of us, right? And Sister Sharon is a sister of St. Joseph of Philadelphia. And she is really good on the email game, let me tell you. She is telling me what's going on. And so many of you do that. I want to transition a little bit. Any other kind of final comments, or one kind of takeaway for us to have from either of you? Give you a couple of minutes for a final word. Not a final word, but a mostly final word.
I really like where we ended, which is that there is so much power in this space. And I really want people to kind of, I want that to be the last thing you all hear. Can sometimes it gets lost in all of the anti-immigrant rhetoric that we hear all day. And so people feel like they don't have, like, if they were to reach out to whoever they know, or if they were to reach out to their members of Congress, that they're not listened to. And I want to dispel that because your opinions matter, and they carry a lot of weight in the proverbial policy tables.
Thanks. Jesus, any final words?
Likewise.
Okay,
Likewise.
great.
And stay tuned, and let's keep working together, and stay tuned.
Yeah.
And come to El Paso at the end of March, or send your people. We're waiting for you.
I want to bring in, we're going to talk a little bit about one particular call to action. We know there's been several shared here, some that are more about narrative change and talking to kind of shifting our understanding of what is the reality of migration right now to really big systems level actions. So I'm going to invite Marilyn. Oh, there you are. Wonderful. And I just want to pause and give gratitude to Jesus and Leidy, who were really tremendous folks who are just tremendous. So thank you and blessings to you in your work. Marilyn, can you share a little bit more about this bill that we've heard a little bit about? HR 1325. Yeah.
I first want to start out by thanking Maria Elena for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. Since I have joined the Alliance, I spent a substantial amount of my time tracking different pieces of legislation, and HR 1325 is one that's really important to this effort. I heard a lot about questions in terms of what happens to people when they're waiting. And I think in terms of my work at the Alliance, it can be summed up quite in one phrase, which is trafficking is high when vulnerability exists. And when people are vulnerable, that's when they become subject to trafficking. We've talked a bit about labor trafficking in the prior session, but there also are different forms of trafficking, which also include, of course, sex trafficking, domestic servitude, and a host of other situations that people can find themselves in. In terms of what the Alliance has been doing, I just want to give a little bit of background to what we've been doing in terms of this work and this bill. And a group of us got together several months ago. We have been working very closely with the National Advocacy Center of the Good Shepherd and have joined forces to really look at different causes of forced migration and how we can, what we call, break the link. And that essentially comprises 3 different areas that we're focused on. One of which Jesus mentioned earlier, which is the root causes of migration, which really would enable individuals who can and want to stay in their home country. We have a different component that focuses on unaccompanied children and some revisions to the Children Court. And of course, HR 1325, which would be work authorization for asylees. Now, we've already heard about the complex and lengthy process that accompanies any application for asylum. And what this bill would do is shorten that time frame. So under the current law, the asylum applicants are not eligible for the work permit until 180 days after they file the asylum claim. So that's sort of your first touch point. And then there also are ongoing backlogs that we've heard about in terms of the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Service. And so that extends the time many months and oftentimes years for even more approval. So it's in these time frames that we've heard about where the vulnerability for individuals exist and where human trafficking can occur. Now, what would this bill do? The Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act really directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to provide employment authorization for eligible asylum applicants, and it would shorten that time frame to 30 days after filing the asylum application. There are two caveats to that. They can't be in detention and the application can't be determined frivolous. But once you get through that, then the work authorization gets put in place and it stays there throughout that asylum application process. As you mentioned, it is bipartisan, and as of today, I checked and there are still 24 co-sponsors. It was introduced in March last year, and it has been referred to the Judiciary Committee, but no additional action since then. So why would we focus on this, you may ask? And one of the things that we've heard is that without the ability to work legally, there certainly is that vulnerability to human trafficking. But also we've heard about labor shortages and the ability of employers to get workers. Many of us have seen the signs hiring. Many of us may have been to different restaurants or different situations where they tell you they're not open the hours that they used to be because they don't have workers that are able to fulfill what they need. So we think that this actually would benefit the asylum seekers, but also the employers. And a couple of things that were mentioned previously, we do want to have the ability for individuals to sustain themselves and their families. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can support passage of this bill. Just backing up a bit and thinking about why this is appropriate and why we support it. One, it improves the process. For anybody who's dealt with a government agency at any level, whether it's federal, state, or local, everybody knows bureaucracy takes time. And red tape always interferes in terms of expeditious determinations. So this bill, we think, would improve the process. We, of course, support it because it promotes the dignity of individuals to be able to work, support themselves, support their families. And from my perspective, it would reduce that vulnerability. Without the ability to work, the vulnerability for trafficking exists. So in terms of next steps from the Alliance and the National Advocacy Center, I do want to mention that we're going to be hosting a specific webinar just on this topic in April. We don't have the date or time yet, but we will be announcing that. And we also are going to be convening in Washington, D.C. on June 6th to advocate for each of those three issues, including the work authorization that I mentioned. And we'll be bringing in sisters from across the country to promote this through a Hill briefing, which would be an educational event for Hill staff. And we're also going to be setting up individual appointments for folks to reach out and talk with their representatives, their senators, their representatives, and talk about all of these issues that are important to them. We certainly can send and include, if you're willing to do so, include you in our action alerts. So if you are not able to join us for the webinars and not able to come in DC in June. There's other things that you can do, which include calling, emailing, writing a letter. All of those things are part of our advocacy campaign that we hope to bring attention to this. And I just want to address one of the questions that you asked in the prior panel about the length of time. In all of the time that I've worked in Washington, oftentimes some of the bills, it's not an immediate solution. Sometimes it takes years, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 15 years before things get passed. So particularly given the fact that we are in an election year, that sort of shortens and compresses the time frame with the attention span of Congress and what they hope to pass. But we can also use this as a foundational year to make sure that we get our message out, that we get visibility for sisters at the national level, and that all of the issues that are important to all of us get communicated to the people who are representing us. So with that, I think I can turn it back to you or take any questions.
Great. Thanks, Marilyn, for that really good overview of HR 1325 and kind of those connections of forced migration and trafficking. We're happy to include those links in our follow-up email to folks. So if people are not remembering or not writing down these links, that's okay. You'll get them in an email later this week. But just, yeah, go ahead.
Lisa, one of the things I also want to mention, the prior panel talked about the temporary and seasonal worker program. We also, from the Alliance, are on record about vulnerabilities and trafficking that exists there, and I'm happy to forward that to you. We went on record with the federal agency that oversees that program, and we're hoping for some regulations this year on that point as well.
Great. So we've covered a lot of ground in about 80 minutes. I want to, again, give deep gratitude to our wonderful panelists and organizations that were featured. Sister Suzanne Jabro from Border Compassion, Jesus de la Torre from Hope Border Institute, Leidy Perez from ASAP, and Marilyn Zigmund from the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. Really tremendous folks. We can do like a little virtual round of applause to them. And just a brief comment that just came in right now. Thank you for providing such truthful information. I think that is a key tenet of why we do these occasional Zoom sessions, is to provide truth and to get clear on how our call to live the gospel intersects with today's realities, particularly those of the migrant. And as we do with all things, we encourage folks to support in prayer, in financial contributions, as well as in legislative advocacy. So those are the three main tenets that we have. And I just want to draw your attention to one particular piece, and then we'll close out in prayer. Every year, the shelter in Mexicali with Border Compassion, they host a Mother's Day event. And our Sisters of St. Joseph and Partners in Mission from the communities in Orange and Los Angeles often go. And they have this deep tradition of bringing a wallet to every mother in that space, which is really tender and kind and supportive. And so if you wish to contribute to that, you can just contribute directly to Border Compassion. I think that link will be dropped in the chat momentarily if you would like to donate to that. But we just like to flag that as a particular Sister of St. Joseph ministry, knowing that there's such good work happening across the country. And with that, I want to turn it over. I'm going to share my screen in a moment to make sure that we have our two prayer leaders to close us out and to introduce a little contemplative creative practice. So Tasha and Sister Deirdre, welcome to the digital floor. And I'm going to make sure I can get my share screen up. 1 second. Remove. Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. So as we turn toward our closing, Kasha and I invite us to pause, to take a deep breath or two, or however many you need, to recenter yourself in this moment, in this space. We've taken in a lot during this gathering, and no doubt there is much stirring in our minds and our hearts and our emotions. At times like this, the reality can feel overwhelming. and we are reminded to rely deeply on our community and our shared prayer. At times like this, when our federal government is failing everyone, and just comprehensive solutions are elusive, we are invited anew to contemplation and to creativity, to stay present to the suffering we cannot resolve, to discern what is ours to do, individually and collectively, and to support one another and our neighbors. So for our closing prayer, Kasia has an invitation to share. We'll have a couple of minutes of shared contemplative silence. Invite you to notice what's stirring in you and any next steps you may feel called to take. And then I'll close us out with a prayer to St. Joseph for people seeking work, which is actually found at the St. Joseph altar at the cathedral in Le Prix, France, where our community was founded. Kasia.
Thank you. Sister Deirdre and I, as she mentioned, have been interested in offering a sort of creative, contemplative activity for the entire family of Joseph. And what we somewhat discerned and somewhat were struck by the Holy Spirit was this idea of origami monarchs actually migrating to the U.S. Mexico border in El Paso. So we're inspired by the deep Japanese tradition of paper cranes, this concept of gathering in number, starting with a simple fold and creating something really, really beautiful. We're also, of course, guided by our patron saint, Saint Joseph, saint of workers and families. And we thought, what a great opportunity to invite us to not only thinking of the calls to action that were given to us today, but of the individuals and the people and the stories that it is we are kind of readying our hearts to walk with. And so on the next slide, Lisa, we have this invitation for everyone from now until a loose deadline of May 1st. What is time? But let's aim for May 1st. From now until May 1st, we invite the entire family of Joseph, sisters at centers or homes, agrégés, associates, perhaps even some of our staff and employees and community partners, to make origami monarch butterflies together. We hope that in the act of creation, there is also the act of contemplation. And while we're folding and being around a table with one another, we might tell stories, we might share prayers. On these origami butterflies, which we promise are easier to make than it sounds, we promise, we practiced. Here it is. We invite you to write a prayer or just a blessing on the wings. I don't know if you can see them. And once you've collected a few, feel free to send them to Sister Deirdre in El Paso. Together with guests in a shelter of Annunciation house, she will be stringing them together and kind of gathering the graces of our blessings and our creation. So again, all of this will come to you in an email. Perhaps as you're doing the creative contemplation, you're also preparing one another to make calls to your congressional representatives. You're sharing prayers. You're inviting in the story of the people and also the gift of our patron saint. Thank you.
Saint Joseph, we pray to you for people who are looking for work, who would like to earn their living or the living of their family. You who are the patron of workers, ensure that all those who need to work can use their strengths and talents in the service of their brothers and sisters for a salary worthy of their efforts. You who are the patron of families, ensure that those who have children to feed and educate do not lack the necessary resources. Have mercy on our sisters and brothers kept in inaction and poverty because of illness or social disorder. Inspire governments, business leaders, and all those responsible for just initiatives and solutions, that each person may have the joy of contributing according to their abilities to the common prosperity by earning their living honorably. May we all benefit together from the abundant goods that God has given us. Amen.
Amen. Amen. With deep gratitude and in hope, in this time of Lent, we say amen together. I'm going to stop the recording, and if anyone would like to come off mute and say hi, we have this tradition of saying hello as you wish. But thanks so much for joining us in this time.